Craig Marker, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So you are a strong first coach, but besides that, you also do something else on the side. I guess it's not your side job, but your main gig. You got a really interesting background. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Trained as a psychologist, but I've always gone back and forth between statistics and psychology. Did my postdoc respecialization in quantitative methods, and you're probably going to hang up on me already, but what this actually means is that I basically study not only whether interventions work, but for whom they work. Do they work for? So in general, in research, we're often looking at the average effectiveness. So does it work on average? But my job is really to look at for whom it works and what are the factors that might make it work better, or what factors does it not work so effectively. So, what works for different people may not work for me or may work for you. So with that, I've been able to do a lot of interesting projects. I teach at Mercer University, but I also get to work with Pavel Tsatsouline on his kettlebell protocols and his strength and conditioning protocols as well.
And how long have you been doing that at Strong First?
Let me think here, about 2 years or so.
Before you started working with Strong First, did you do any type of coaching or training?
Oh, most definitely. And I've always done training and done a lot with research. It's just working with Pavel for the past 2 years, did a lot of kettlebells, and, I read Pavel's work years ago. So I've always been interested in the research, on strength and conditioning, and also nutrition has always been something I've followed pretty closely.
Right, so we've had the CEO of Strong First, Eric Frohart, on the show to talk about kettlebell training in general, and something we've written about extensively on the site before. And I know there's a lot of folks who strictly use kettlebells for the training program. For example, you might be doing Pavel's Simple But Sinister program. I've done that before. It's great. Besides kettlebell training in and of itself, right, for it's just as your training protocol, how can kettlebells, like supplementing with kettlebells, benefit other fitness domains? Like, for example, how could kettlebell training translate over to, improving your squat, barbell squat, or your barbell deadlift?
Sure. If it's okay, I might just give a little background of what I see happening in the swing, because I think it seems like the kettlebell has this magical property, and I want to explain it as best as I see it. So Yuri Verkhoshansky was one of the great Soviet track and field coaches in the 1960s. He later, really wrote the field of strength and conditioning in the Soviet Union. He developed what was called shock training at the time, or what he called it as shock training. And his athletes would drop off of a box, they'd hit the ground and rebound and jump as high as they could as quickly as possible. And his athletes just did phenomenally. They were breaking many records, and he became known as the father of plyometrics. His work is really great, helps people really improve their sprinting. One problem with this method is he had athletes jumping off the box as high as 1.5 meters or 60 inches, and it's tough to do that movement properly. So if you don't land correctly, or the ankle caves in a little bit, or the knee tends to follow if the ankle caves in a little bit, structural damage can start to occur. So athletes really need to have good movement patterns to do these drills. If we think about the kettlebell swing, it looks a lot like the jump. Our feet are in a position, our butt goes back, and we look like we're going to jump. And when we throw the kettlebell back between our legs, we're reversing force, similar to how a shock jump would be. So it's instead of having to land on the ground and then reverse the force, we're doing it with a kettlebell, so our legs can be in a good position. We don't have to find the ground and to land properly. So I think it's a lot safer movement, and it does reverse a lot of force. So Pavel was actually tested with Brandon Hetzler on a force plate. He could generate about 400 pounds of force on the downswing of this kettlebell swing. So reversing that much force, I think, is where the magic happens neurologically for the kettlebell swing. So we prime our neurological systems to react quickly, and it's the stretch reflex that's doing it, but it's been shown many times to increase vertical jump in athletes, especially like volleyball players. A study done by Fabio Zonin, he did it with ballerinas. These were pretty good ballerinas. These were almost elite ballerinas. And he had them do an 8-week course on using kettlebells, the Simple and Sinister, as you mentioned. And what they found was that they improved their ballet jumps, which is fascinating to me because a ballet jump looks nothing like a kettlebell swing, thank goodness. And I think it's part of that it's that neurological connection. Like we're creating, we're rebounding quicker, more powerfully when we do our kettlebell swings. So I think it's a really good tool for building explosive strength. And then we also see it working really well for powerlifting movements like the deadlift, like you mentioned. There have been many times people train for a kettlebell event and then they come back afterward and lift a lot more in their deadlift, even though they haven't trained their deadlift at all. So it's, and the pattern looks very similar in a deadlift and a kettlebell swing. So the top of the deadlift looks pretty much exactly like a kettlebell swing. So it's a really effective exercise. It's simple. I don't think the kettlebell itself has magical properties. It's just very simple and portable.
One thing I noticed too about what I liked about the Simple and Sinister program, it was hard, but it didn't feel like it beat me up.
Exactly. And I think that's one of, the hallmarks of, and one of the reasons I wanted to really work with Pavel is the programs keep me healthy and just always ready. He works with a lot of special forces and, they can't say, I can't go today because my legs are sore from squats. His programs are always built where you have some left in the tank and you can train again the next day and be healthy.
So say someone wanted to get this benefit. You mentioned, Pavel was able to generate 400 pounds of force on the backswing. Like how heavy of a kettlebell do you need to use to get that, or does it matter?
Yeah, excellent question. So yeah, there's a couple ways we can do this. I mean, one, if we think about setting a kettlebell on our foot, we can handle that. If we drop it on our foot, that's going to really do some damage. But if we throw it on our foot, it becomes even more damaging. So usually what we do with a kettlebell swing is we pop the kettlebell up in the air, it floats, and then it falls back down. So with that, we're probably not generating 400 pounds of force on the backswing. But if we actively throw it down, which is called an overspeed eccentric, that's where we can generate a lot more force. So I think Pavel did that with a 32 kilogram, but for the most part, that's 70 pounds. 24 kilogram, 54 pounds works quite well. You can generate a lot of force, with a kettlebell that doesn't seem that big.
So for someone who's just starting out with a kettlebell, what weight do you recommend they get?
Yeah, the old recommendations were sort of a 16 kilogram for men and, eventually working up to a 24 kilogram and maybe an 8 or 12 kilogram for women, and then working up to a 12 or 16.
Let's talk about just training in general, because you've written a lot over at Breaking Muscle about not just kettlebell training, but also just training in general. Let's talk about beginning training, whether you're doing kettlebell or barbell training or whatever else. What do you see are the biggest mistakes beginners make when they're first starting out with any sort of strength training program?
First of all, I like that you use the word training. I think, one mistake I see is people call it a workout. And, there's this idea that I need to suffer, I need to work out, like somehow everything needs to be spent after training. And I think that idea that we need to suffer in the gym, there's probably some usefulness to suffering and you need to, put some energy into it, but that's not our end goal. And I think sometimes, we almost become addicted to that suffering and, I have to go to the gym and get this spent feeling. And I think sometimes, it's kind of a harsh statement, but feelings don't matter. Your feelings don't matter in the gym. Following a good protocol is what matters. And like you said, the Simple and Sinister, there's many days it's like, oh, this is it. And, you're done in 15 minutes and that's all you need to do today. And you don't have to feel spent. So I think part of it is just following a good protocol, doing a training session. It's training the skills in each session. And then I think thinking of each rep as an opportunity to find perfection. You're always searching for that perfect rep. I think those are important things for beginners to keep in mind.
Well, going back, I'm going to kind of backtrack here because the question just came to my mind. Let's say you are doing barbell training. Like that's what I do. I do press, squat, deadlift, bench press. Could I include it like a Simple and Sinister routine like on my off days, or would that be too much?
I think that, the big thing is, depending on how much volume you're doing on the other exercises, I would definitely think you add it. But if you're doing super high volume with those, you're going to need the recovery for those exercises. So but we do often build a Simple and Sinister type program for powerlifters. I think the Turkish get up is one of the best ways to protect your shoulder, to sort of prehabilitate your shoulder, to keep it strong and safe, especially if you're doing a lot of bench press. That having a kettlebell overhead that's moving all around is great for building those extra muscles around there. The swing is going to really help your deadlift. So I think it really fits well for a powerlifting type of program.
Before we got on the show, I was mentioning that I just did my first weightlifting competition. As powerlifting is sort of my thing. I really enjoy it. I did starting strength, the 3x5 routine that I've advanced on to more intermediate and advanced programs because my linear progression stopped. So I had to adjust my training. But you, besides kettlebell stuff, Pavel also does barbell programming. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah. And actually, a lot of his original work in the old Muscle Medias and the old Iron Mind, were barbell type programs. So he really, the tool is not important. I mean, he ended up popularizing kettlebells because, that was unique to people and, everybody wanted to search him out for that. But yeah, his barbell programs are excellent. He's worked on, he's had these very simple principles over the years, but he's looked at the old Soviet systems and put these principles into what they used to do. And there's some, simple rules involved with that. And, one of them is basically waiving the volume and waiving the intensity. So basically we can think of it as sort of a fractal pattern. So every, month, you're going 1 month a little more volume, the next month a little less, and the third month sort of in between. So you're always waiving how many reps you're doing basically for the month. Within the month, each week you waive the volume. So some weeks, it's high, medium, or low. And then within the week itself, you're waiving the volume too. You've got a heavy day, medium day, light day. And what he found that the Soviet system was incredible in how much they measured everything. They measured every training sessions. And Medvedev, I can't pronounce his name properly, but he wrote over 300 articles on these Soviet type training programs. So Pavel went through these and came up with these basic ideas. And one was that waiving the volume and the intensity every week. And these things don't always go together. So I think Ripeto's program is really good, but if you think about it, it's a very linear program that on week 1, you're working with 5 reps of a lighter weight. Week 2, a little heavier weight, but fewer reps. And so everything goes in a straight line pattern, where this will waive and your volume and your intensity aren't coupled together. They're not correlated. That some weeks you're doing high intensity, heavier weight, but also higher volume. And other weeks you might be doing low of both of those. So they're completely uncoupled from each other. So it's a really neat system. And he has a seminar that he does called Plan Strong, but he'll have a book coming out soon on that system.
So I mean, what's the benefit of having those sort of undulations, right, in volume and intensity?
Yeah, I think for me and for the people I've trained, it really keeps people healthy. That, we're not the old idea of, just keep go heavier yet, and then get injured. There's a mentality of that. This is waves to load. So if you follow the program, you're automatically going to get, rest weeks and, easier weeks involved. So I see athletes being healthier, but I also see some pretty incredible strength gains. We had the kettlebell level 2 sort of certification. The big strength exercise is a press with a kettlebell that's half your body weight. And it's a pretty tough thing to do, and it's many people can't do it. We put a bunch of people on this program, and every one of them did it. And it's pretty amazing how strong people get. And we've done it with some Olympic lifters, and they've, greatly improved their performance, their strength performance in their Olympic lifting. So I think, it keeps people healthy, and then it also works quite well to get them stronger.
Right. And so is this a program, this Plan Strong program, is this something that is good for beginners and intermediates? Like it's for any, strength level?
Yeah, and I think, in general, this sort of waiving the load is kind of a useful idea, that you have light, medium, heavy days. Of course, the volume will change. So if you're, an athlete that's new, you might not need as much volume, at the beginning than an elite athlete. So, I think that's probably where the biggest difference is. But yeah, it could certainly be used for beginners as well.
Okay. We'll put some links on the site where people can find out more information about this when we publish our show notes. So you've written a lot for Breaking Muscle. It's one of my go-to strength and conditioning sites. It's a lot of in-depth content over a variety of different topics. One article that stuck out to me is you talk about the importance of taking into consideration individual differences when deciding on a training program, or even just like the lifts you use. What are some of those differences people need to consider when they start a training program?
And I think this part of this is just how to read science. I think, there's an article that came out a few weeks ago about HIIT training that you may have seen. And it basically talked about, the headlines were about HIIT, high intensity interval training, increasing longevity. And I saw this headline over and over again. So I went to the research, and they had 27 people and 3 different protocols. So 9 people were on the HIIT protocol. And what they found, these people increased their mitochondrial density. And, this is associated with aging. The more mitochondria we have, the better we age. But, they didn't actually measure longevity in these people. So sometimes we read these research articles and we think, oh, I need to go do HIIT training. And, I keep some certain questions in mind as I look at research. And I think everybody needs to do this is, first of all, look at the sample and ask, how similar is it to me? If you're looking to find something useful for you, then make sure the sample is the same. So if I'm looking at a nutrition study and, they found this new substance, helps people lose weight, are they looking at an obese sample and, I'm not obese, or, the other way around, so try to make sure that the sample's similar to you. Another thing I do when I look at, science and research protocols are the cost involved. If I, green tea and fish oil are, constantly in the news as being good for me, I can pretty simply add that at a very little cost to me. So it's not going to hurt me to add that to my plan. But if I, changing my whole training system, that's going to be a little bit more cost. So I always think about the cost involved in testing things out. And then I need to ask the question, how I know whether it works or not. So I need to measure things individually. We all have to be our own scientists. We have to be our own coach. And, so I need to figure out if it worked for me. And I think that's the important part, and how it works for you as an individual. So measure and check to see if it worked, I think is another important part.
Yeah, I think that you just touched on a thing that I think a lot of beginners make particularly is they'll start a program and then they'll read some study or some article about, here's this great program that has all these great results. And so they immediately jump ship to this new program. They start doing that, and they read another thing and they jump ship, and like they never allow themselves to see if the program they're doing is actually working. I know I did that a lot before I started, getting really consistent with my training. And the result was I didn't have like really good results.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to do that. I do that too. I love reading new programs. It's being patient. Like I have to finish this 12-week program out, where I will never know if it worked or not. So yeah, it's fun looking at all these different types of programs.
Another article that you've written about that really stuck out to me because it kind of syncs up with our spirit we have here at the Art of Manliness. You had this article about live like it's 1940 or train like it's 1940. And it was just all about incorporating more movement throughout your day. Can you talk us a little bit through how we should all be living like 1940s dads or men? Yeah.
And I mean, that's why I love what you guys do too. And the paleo idea sounds great to me, but I don't hunt my food, and I don't have a way to do that. So I thought 1940s might be a little simpler place to go. But I, like in the airport or even at work, I'm on the 4th floor. I never try to take the elevator. The stairs are there for me, as a perfectly good opportunity. So I try to imagine those things don't exist. I have a push mower. A wheel, is not motorized. It's just got the little thing that spins around. I kind of like using that. There's all of these conveniences, but if I try to avoid the conveniences, I'll get a lot more exercise in my life. And I think that's where I can add those little benefits. They'll pay off a lot more in the end of the day. And even right now, like I'm sure many of your guests have standing desk, and it keeps me more mobile during the day. Or I think you use a standing desk as well, and so just those little things add up quite a bit. I'm also doing like calf stretching right now. As I stand here, I'm stretching my calves out and kind of doing different things, working on my mobility every once in a while, putting my foot up on a stool. The more we can do throughout the day, it doesn't all have to be at the training session. I think those things are quite important.
Yeah, the real mower, I have one of those. That thing is like a prowler sled. It's an hour-long prowler sled session.
Yeah, it's and honestly, like I love it because I can then just put my headphones in and listen to a podcast. If I had a motorized one, I couldn't do that. So I get a lot more listening to your podcast in by playing with the wheel mower.
Well, I appreciate that. And the other thing too, it cuts your grass better, I feel like.
Yep.
Because it cuts it like scissors, it doesn't just chop it. We've written an article about that. So if any of you are interested in the push reel mower, I think the picture you had on Breaking Muscle is the one that I have. Yeah, so fun stuff. So just move more throughout the day. Stand up, take a walk, inconvenience yourself a little bit to get a little bit more movement, because those little things add up.
Most definitely. Yeah, park the car. I mean, these are commonly known things. Park the car far away as much as possible. And I love airports. I mean, the stairs are. I love your little challenges that you have. You have different articles about challenging yourself. I feel if I can't carry my bags up staircases at airports, then that's one of my markers. I need to be able to do that. So my wife laughs at me, but I always take the stairs and always carry the bags up the stairs. So it's you need to do those challenges.
We've had a guest on the show named Walker Lamond. He wrote a book called Rules for My Unborn Son. And one of his rules was no wheelie luggage. And implying this sort of, live like it's 1940. I mean, you can apply this to diet as well, because back then, I know my grandfather grew up on a farm. So it was a lot of bacon and eggs in the morning, oatmeal, just like whole foods. And they didn't eat a lot. Like our portions just gotten out of control. As a consequence, because he ate like that, like he lived a relatively healthy life. I mean, he lived to be almost 101. I'm sure genetics had a lot to do with that, but I'm sure lifestyle helped as well.
Yeah. We can certainly, I agree with that too for eating. I try to eat as little processed food as possible. When I can have the simple ingredients, the better it is. So.
Fitness doesn't have to be difficult. I oftentimes feel like we complicate things because it makes us feel like we're doing something. But when you just eat good foods, not too much, move regularly, exercise, you're going to be good.
Yep, most definitely.
So let's shift over to how you've incorporated your academic career as a psychologist to your training. I'm curious, how has your work there with psychology influenced the way you train or coach?
They're really similar. I don't really see it being very different. What I do with my students, I have to challenge them through their work, and the same thing with coaching. Like I try to develop everyone to be their own coach. My goal is to give you everything I've got, all my information, and you become your own coach. And you'll eventually, like with my students, the same thing. You'll have all my knowledge. You need to be able to teach people how to do this as well. So I think coaching, pushing people to do things that are uncomfortable is really important. And I try to role model that. If I'm telling you to go do something, I better be doing it myself. So I really have to push myself in both areas.
How much do you think training is psychological? Because I've noticed I think we were talking about this before we got on the show, like on the line, is that my experience, there's been days where there's a weight I've lifted easily before, and then I come in and then it just, I can't do it. And like, I know it's mental. And it's happened to me, the other week, had a 485 pound deadlift for my training session. And I've done that before easy. Got there to the bar, put my hands on it, started to pull it, and like it just wouldn't come off the bar. And I texted my coach. I have an online coach, and I said, I can't get this. And he's like, no, it's all mental. Get in there and do it. And like, I went in there and I did it, and it was fine. So I mean, how much do you think training or physical effort is a matter of psychology?
It's funny. I don't really think about it that way, but you're exactly right. I mean, it is very mental. I put in the work. Like I said earlier, feelings don't matter in your training. That you followed your coach's protocol, and you didn't get it. Like what I would do in that situation too is just come back in a few minutes. You might have to, especially for deadlifting, might have to amp yourself up a little bit. move around a little bit more and listen to music, whatever it is. But, you just do your reps and you go forward. I do think the psychology can be a real detriment. Like if you would have, started having internal talk of, I'll never get to it. I'm terrible. I used to be able to do this. I can't, that type of thing is what gets people unmotivated and not in the gym anymore. So I think those things are really important. We don't allow a lot of, negative talk. And I think just, it's not about being positive, like, oh, I'm the greatest either. It's sort of just being realistic. Like, okay, that didn't go off the ground. Give me a few more minutes, and not judging it so much. So you don't make it a catastrophe, nor are you being Pollyannish and saying, I'm the best. And, even though that's not true at the moment.
So that's good advice for overcoming setbacks, whether it's a plateau or an injury. Like don't start wallowing in the negative self-talk.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's a learning experience too. Like, I mean, it sounds like you learned from that experience quite well that, I contacted my coach and he just told me to do this. And so you learn like, hey, if I give a few more minutes rest, maybe I didn't have enough rest between that set and the one before it. Or, some days I'm not going to be mentally there, but physically I can still perform this, so whatever it is, you have to do that after action review and, figure out what can I learn from this. And, failure is one of the best teachers. So we really need to learn from when we don't do things right.
One article that you wrote for Breaking Muscle kind of combines psychology and training was this idea of the placebo principle in performance. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was really interesting.
I've been fascinated about the placebo effect for years. And, so with performance, exactly like in 1972, they did one of the first studies on steroid placebo use. And they gave this group of power lifters, I think they did like 5 or 6 weeks of training. And then, after that, they said, we're going to give some of you steroids and see how that improves your performance. They didn't give anyone steroids, but the group that thought they did had a big improvement in performance. And, this placebo effect, with thinking about strength improvement has happened over and over again. It's also happened with endurance athletes. So you give runners super oxygenated water, which is just plain water as a placebo effect. They run 8% faster. You give people amino acids telling them it's going to improve their strength. They get 20% stronger. The mind is very powerful in how it improves performance. A lot of antidepressants, the effect of antidepressants is often thought to be about 50% placebo effect. So people start taking a pill and they think it's making them better. And we see many people who are depressed have this immediate gain, like I feel less depressed, but it takes about 4 weeks for an antidepressant to kick in. So there's no way that it is working that fast. It's all placebo effect.
Yeah, it made me think about when that TED talk about, I think it was her last name is Cuddy. She talks about like raising your hands in the air and increases testosterone. You should do that before a big. And I've noticed a lot of people doing that, but there's research that's come out recently, kind of objecting to that, saying that maybe it's not acute, like the effect isn't as acute as we think it is. But I think it's still like if you think like raising your hands in your air is going to give you a testosterone boost, so you can be stronger or more confident, like. It still works. Why not do it?
Yeah, I think that one study, there's been some, they haven't been able to replicate the one about your arms in the air. But what you said is if you believe it, then it will, have that effect on testosterone. So it's part of that believing it, sometimes purchase supplements and, I know I'm probably buying into the placebo effect. Like if that works, then that's great. Like I don't, it's these super labels, like, all these things that the supplement industry pushes. It's like, hey, if it's helping me, placebo effect or whatever it is, I think that's great. Yeah, I think it's really fascinating to me.
Let's talk about a little more in depth about your academic work. I saw in your CV that you focus on anxiety disorders. It's kind of been one of your things. I'm curious, like, what constitutes an anxiety disorder? Like, I'm sure some people have felt, anxiety at some point in their lives, but like, what does it feel like for someone who has an anxiety disorder?
I mean, we have to have anxiety. It's a signal that something's wrong. So each of us has a certain amount of anxiety. If we don't, then we have a disorder on the other side of things. But, for people with anxiety disorders, it's really got to cause some functional impairment in their lives. So, where many of us are afraid to present in public places or, things like that, that's normal. But if you can't go to work or you can't ask people out on dates because you've got so much social anxiety, then it becomes more of a disorder and a problem. So I think that's the big difference. So we're on the spectrum of anxiety, but the people at the extreme end, are the ones that just can't perform in life anymore and missing out on things that they would like to do.
So I'm sure, people who are listening who have an anxiety disorder probably need to see a professional. But I mean, I'm curious, within your research and your career, are there proactive steps that you've found that people can start taking that are small but actually have an immediate effect to mitigate that anxiety disorder?
I have never felt so powerful in my life as when I treat people with anxiety disorder, because you see people just change their lives completely. And, it's really very simple. It's the idea of you have to face your fears. And, not all at once, and not necessarily have to, do it once, but, you figure out the exact fear and expose yourself in incremental doses. And this, goes for people who are functionally impaired, versus, if you're just afraid to present at work or ask somebody out on a date. For people with social anxiety, we often, start them with small tasks like giving a speech just to me or somebody they trust. And then we move them up to talking to random people at the grocery store. Or it depends what they fear. Like if they fear making a fool out of themselves, that's what we have to do with them. We have to make a fool out of themselves. So, one of the things we do at the store is we have them go up to a random person and say, "Don't I know you from someplace?" And they just have to, "No, I think I know you." And they have to sit and have a conversation where the person's looking at them strangely like, "No, I don't know you. Please leave me alone." And, after a while, people doing this, normal everyday things just don't seem so bad. The more we put people into extreme situations, the everyday anxiety isn't so bad. So for somebody with social anxiety, one of the big things we often do is we have them, take a bunch of caffeine and then go do karaoke. And if you can do that, you can handle doing a presentation at work. You can handle asking somebody on a date. You can handle, those types of things. So, we build up to it. It's like training. We don't start you off at a powerlifting competition. We'll start you off with, some, technique type things and, then build you up from there. So it's fascinating and fun to me because people's lives change, and it's just such a simple thing for me to do. It's a very simple technique, and big changes come from it.
I mean, it sounds like these techniques can also work for people who are experiencing run-of-the-mill anxiety, right? To stay cool, calm, and collected. For example, if they have to give a presentation in front of a large audience, or even performing like in sports or something like that, you can basically put yourself in situations that are uncomfortable before you actually get to the event. So you're not as anxious when you actually do the real thing.
Most definitely. And I think, trying to do the events are great, but then, if you can amp it up, like we've had people who are functioning really well and, just afraid to present, IO of a big company. He was afraid to present. So we had him practicing by drinking caffeine, sitting in a sauna presenting. So he had all the worst possible symptoms of anxiety. And then when he's in the regular boardroom, it was nothing. So, I think pushing yourself in practice so that you perform really well in when you're actually trying to. So doing it's like how the Navy SEALs train. I mean, they're the anxiety experts. They push people really hard in training, and then, they perform to their level of training, that they know they can handle things because they've done these extreme type of training.
Well, hey, Craig, this has been a great conversation. We've covered a broad range of topics here, but where can people learn more about your work?
I'm not really good at this online presence type of thing, but, like you said, people can find my articles at StrongFirst or breakingmuscle.com. If people are ever in Atlanta, we've got an intentional community. We all train outside in our Courage Corner gym with kettlebells and barbells. So anybody can come. That you can look at armorbuilding.com. And if anybody wants to come do research with me, our address there is markerlab.org. But yeah, I'd love to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me.
Fantastic. Well, Craig Marker, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Brett. I love your show, and I greatly appreciate being on it.
My guest today is Craig Marker. He is a StrongFirst kettlebell coach. You can find more information about his work at craigmarker.com. You can see a lot of his content that he's written at breakingmuscle.com. Just search for Craig Marker there. And you can find more information about kettlebell training at strongfirst.com. Also, check out our show notes at aom.is/marker, where you can find links to resources where you can delve deeper into this topic.